Well, this is Dateline News and Conversation, and we're live. And the topic tonight is the continuation of a conversation with Alanna Hartzok. Um, she has written a book, The Earth Belongs to Everyone, and we've been talking about the economics of war and peace. And we're going to continue that discussion tonight. We're going to take a look at a number of current world crises, beginning with Venezuela, and of course Iran. And in those two instances, it's all about the oil. And so we'll be talking about oil as a resource tonight. I also want to talk about what's happening in the United States, especially in Minnesota. That's not the only state, but it's happening in several other blue states. We'll talk about that, and then we're going to talk, and Alanna will talk about a vision of what she calls Earth Rights Democracy, and one of the things that I've noticed is that many movements, maybe not even movements, but a lot of people are talking about how terrible and corrupt the current economic system is. And very few people have a vision of what they would replace it with, or if and when it collapses, what's going to happen. And so Alanna is going to talk about this because she's involved in a very small movement, but a very significant movement. So, Alanna, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Regis.
Well, I'm looking forward to the discussion tonight. You had suggested we take a dive into current world crises, and beginning with Venezuela and Iran. Where do you want to go with that?
Well, you suggested start with Venezuela, and I'm on board for that. Yeah, the order that you propose is great. And then remember, I have a show and tell item.
Go for it.
Okay. I'm from Pennsylvania. I was away 25 years and I moved back in 1990. And I knew there was the oil region of Pennsylvania, and I finally visited it. A few months ago, I spent a few days in our Western Pennsylvania oil region where the oil industry began. Some people in Pennsylvania don't know that. They think it was Texas. So while in this incredibly interesting region, I picked up a little bottle of oil from the McClintock well, and it is the world's oldest continuously producing oil well, established in 1861. So I haven't yet opened the bottle. Native American people in the region, because the oil was on the surface, they used it to oil their hair. So here it is, the first oil well continuously producing in the world oil. Native Americans put it on on their hair, and they used it as medicine. They put it on their skin. All right. Should I taste it? Tastes not great, but fairly benign. So the reason the Native Americans didn't use the oil for lighting fire and so on, I mean, they didn't manufacture glass bottles. So our oil lamps were in glass bottles, and they were blubber. They were from the whales, and the whales were becoming extinct. So actually, the oil industry saved the whales from becoming extinct. Now, we've been talking about the classical economics, the Henry George economics of the factors of land, labor, and capital. Land is all the gifts of nature. So the oil is land. Water is land. Whatever humans didn't produce in the natural world, we call classical economics calls the factor of land. Now, the capital is wealth made from labor on land. So this bottle the glass from sand, another type of land. Labor on sand produces glass, and the label is paper. So we work up from the trees that grow out of the earth, we work up through labor and capital paper. So this little bottle is our land, labor, and capital. And as we go through our geopolitical conversations, we're going to look at those elements and what we've done and what we're doing and what we're continuing to do in competition and fight over the earth's elements. And then there, of course, the factor of money, which is simply intended to facilitate trade. But when you have this land problem, the symbol system of money becomes all powerful. So then we have the money problem. So that is what we've been exploring in our past, actually, 3 economics of war and peace sessions. Okay, ready to launch into Venezuela, Regis?
Wait a minute. Let me jump in. You know, you've been talking about the land, and you know, I wasn't thinking specifically about what's really meant by the land, but as you just mentioned, it's all about the resources. And so when you think about it, you mentioned sand, you mentioned the oil, you mentioned the trees that are needed to make paper. I want to go a little bit further with that. You've got all of the food and elements that people, plants, and animals need. You've got water. You've got air. You have fruit and vegetables. It's basically everything that the Creator or the Great Spirit has provided us humans everything we need to survive.
Exactly.
And from what I'm understanding, because of this concept of ownership, a handful really of people have owned it all. I mean, it goes back centuries, I'm sure. You know, you can go back to the empires, you can go back to, you know, the whole system of feudalism, and now capitalism. And it's the way I'm understanding it, it's a handful of very, very wealthy, powerful people now that own just about all of it. And as a result, we just become either serfs or renters, laborers and renters. Am I right about that?
You've got it. You've got it. When I first came across this economics, it was 2 hours a week for 5 weeks. At the end of it, I got my economic enlightenment. I got my questions answered. Why poverty? Why wealth inequality? Why war? Yeah. I dropped out of my PhD in psychology program and I went down this path for 50 years now. So congratulations. This is so important because the obfuscation, the corruption of economics began 100 years ago when the factor land, all the gifts of nature, the earth, the air, the water, the electromagnetic spectrum, the Wi-Fi, L-Fi zones where satellites hang and balance between Earth and Moon. That's a good place for satellites. That's where the satellites cluster. That's land. That's expensive real estate out there. Humanity should be auctioning it off, okay? So it's a really big picture here. That whole land, Earth, was made a subset of capital. And so neoliberal, neocon is like it was a con game. The wealthy people saw this understanding of economics, the true economics, as a threat to their elite privilege system. So they paid to create schools of economics, University of Chicago, Columbia, I believe it was Johns Hopkins, 3 or 4 schools, to then create the economic system we're under now, which made the land element, the earth itself, merely a subset of capital. So you will only have capital and labor, and the way things are set up, with a few controlling now the products of the wealth, the capital that come out of the land, you have this continuing adversary between labor and capital. And also, it kind of equates out to all these political divides, Republican, Democrat. One wants socialism, one wants capitalism. Well, maybe there's a third way. Maybe we're artificially divided. So the true, genuine economics, as it progressed to then the point where Henry George independently discovered these deep truths and discovered, also a truth that the physiocrats in France, the originators of our classical economics, saw. You don't tax the labor and production because that's your privately, individually produced wealth. That's your freedom. That's your ability. That's your time producing wealth. You don't tax that. That's theft by the government. But you don't allow a few to own the commons, the few to be able to privately capture the profit from land and resources. Our great John Mohawk, academic and native elder, he said the problem in the Western world began 500 years ago. Wasn't talking about Columbus. It was talking about the enclosures starting in Britain, continuing through Europe, that had the barons, the land barons, then start removing, kicking, displacing the common people off the common lands and out of right of access to the fields, to the forest, to the gifts of nature. Then you saw this terrible impoverization of so many people throughout Europe. And of course, if you're coming from Europe and you don't have money to get here, when North America was being settled, you became an indentured servant. So you gave 7 years of your life to pay for your passage over here before you were freed. And of course, if you're coming from Africa, you're completely enslaved by the system of land ownership by the few. So yeah, it's really key. It's an awakening to really understand the intellectual crime of the last century. Had this understanding of economics been put forward and implemented, we might not have had the horrific wars that we did in the last century, continuing on today. Right thought, right action follows right thought. And if we don't have correct understanding of the economics of power, how are we to take right action to rectify it? So thank you for entertaining us all with this important discussion, Regis.
Well, you mentioned wars, and haven't all wars been a matter of land and resources?
I can't think of any that haven't. I mean, they may have a veneer. This is a just war, like St. Augustine's just war theory, some rationale. Or it may be like this is a religious war, okay? Or this is some kind of tribal war. But it's still fighting over territorial control.
And that's the point that I wanted to get at. It was about territory, but territory that had resources that a particular empire or kingdom needed. And that's basically what's been going on like forever. And just in our lifetime, when you look at the wars that the United States has, well, before our lifetime, whether it was the Crimean War, that was a matter of resources. France and England and others wanted to get their hands on Russia. Then you had World War I, which is another insane, crazy war. World War II, all about land and resources. And, you know, the Yalta Conference was just a power move between the United States, the UK, and Joseph Stalin in the Soviet Union to control the future order of land and boundaries, which is all freaking falling apart right now. It hasn't held. And it wasn't just Donald Trump. Donald Trump, in my opinion, is an absolutely insane, idiotic caricature with no morality, no respect for human life or anything. But he's not the one in charge. It's the same people in charge, this very small group of extremely wealthy people that are orchestrating it all. Now, I want to go to today and the wars that we're witnessing today. You got to consider Venezuela as a war. The United States and Donald Trump committed a war crime by kidnapping the president and his wife, whisking him out of the country, putting him on trial in the United States was initially for being a drug trafficker, which is totally bogus. But it's obvious as soon as that was over, Donald Trump says, I'm going to govern the country, and this oil is ours. It always has been. And so here is, it's a war, but it's the most recent land grab for resources orchestrated by the United States. Now, oil, you started off with that little glass jar of oil. Let's talk about what's going on in the Middle East, in Iran. That's about oil. Secondarily, I don't know, secondarily, maybe it's the same thing. It's their form of government that is not in alignment with America's interests. But it's about the oil. That's what the entire Middle East has been about. Money. It's black gold. And, the same thing if you look at Mexico. Trump is threatening he's going to take Mexico, make that part of the United States. What's Mexico got? In addition to lots of food, Mexico has got an awful lot of oil. He wanted to make Canada the 51st state. And, Canada's got lots of oil, that Trump is going to want. So is he going to invade Canada? It's this thirst for the world's, what do I want to call it? Currency, but what's worth money? What everybody needs to keep this global situation going, which is oil. And so, what we're seeing, I think, is exactly what you've been talking about. Money and land and resources are basically the root of these wars, because through these wars, these incredibly wealthy people get more and more wealth and more power. Yes? No?
It's just what I had mentioned previously, Frank Durrell's excellent documentary called What I Learned About U.S. Foreign Policy. He's taken bits of 12 other documentaries of the wars of the last 50, 60 years. And it's free online, What I Learned About U.S. Foreign Policy. Viewing those documentaries through the lens of the land problem and the money problem, it all becomes quite clear that these are the two primary power nexus of what we're up against. But, it all comes from consciousness and levels of conscious awareness, whether it is an ego that is very separated from others, from nature, from the world, and is very overblown, and therefore a very false identity of who we are as human beings, that somehow the structures of this incomplete democracy that we established in the United States, that has a crack in the Liberty Bell, crack being the incompletion, the imperfection that we have not founded democracy on the birthright to our earth of all people, equal rights to earth, which is just a given from an indigenous consciousness that fully is embedded in understanding the interconnectedness of all. So now we get to see pictured out there in the world the extreme form of what we've been all along. We had free land in the beginning of the democracy. Poor people could come over and get access like my Hessian family did, my Hessian ancestries, but most of us from Europe came over in poverty. Irish, it just goes on, Italian. And we were able to somehow work and make a living. But as Henry George saw, once that free land frontier barrier was closed, once we completely pushed the native people into their reservations and out of their land, then the middle class did thrive. So democracy appeared, oh, what a wonderful system. But when that frontier boundary closes, there's no more free land. Now there's no more affordable land. Now the crush of impoverishment and gross wealth inequality is being experienced here in the United States. In my small town community that I moved back to because of the lack of affordable housing in San Francisco area, I could get affordable housing here in the 1990s, no more. We have increasing homelessness. And it's appalling. But what I'm saying is this is going to drive us, we the people, to go deeper and think more clearly and become more connected in deep, respectful conversations, to find the way forward, to find what we want to say yes to. If we don't find our yes, if we just protest, no, 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 we're just going to get slammed, because the other side, we call them the evil ones or the unconscious ones that are nevertheless in control. They're going to slam us, and we're going to see a bloody violence. We're right at the cusp of civil war. We're watching Minnesota, correct? But back to Iran for a minute, Regis. If you see those maps, and I'm sure you have, Iran has U.S. military bases completely surrounding it. So Iran, as Iraq was meant to be, in the geopolitics of U.S. full spectrum dominance, not only its oil, it is geopolitical power positions. He who can close, he or she, or the nation, the people, the elites that control that area of Eurasia can control Eurasia. So the grand plan of this insane geopolitics we're up against, headed by Donald Trump, whatever forces are behind him, we know it's the same force of human, unconscious, Wetiko, as we talked about before. The native people use this term Wetiko to describe the totally insane, lying, deceiving consciousness that they experienced when Europeans came over and made promises and broke them. When European men, they saw beating their wives and their children, they were appalled. What kind of consciousness does this? They called it Wetiko. So this is a consciousness. And so the beautiful vision, and we're doing beautiful images now of people of all races with their arms embracing the earth. The earth belongs to everyone. The earth is our birthright. That vision, which from your own work, friends in Crimea, friends of Russia, you have that loving impulse that we're one people, that we're one family, and the images and the visions and the aspirations of our hearts to then create a political economic system based on this human unity is what the lens is that we're moving towards. So Venezuela oil, yes. Geopolitics, we don't want China and Russia in there anymore. China and Russia having access to Venezuela oil, but also gold, silver, a lot of rare earth in Venezuela. It's this geopolitical game where we're trying to use military force and absolute neglect of any law, no international law, no United States constitutional law, nada. I believe he carries some kind of strain of a imperial, fully imperial consciousness like the emperors of the Roman Empire. I believe we're still up against the kind of imperialism of the Roman Empire that's full force that now is coming forward once again. This is what we're up against. The Gracchi brothers, when that Roman Empire was right on into the violence, were land reformers. Now get this, the Gracchi brothers were from the upper class people, but they were concerned about their social political conditions, and they had concern about the common people, and they were land rights land reformers. Well, they were assassinated with. In Person Planet, written years ago by Theodore Roszak, he says, land reform is the undiscovered revolution in American politics. All right? So we take that land lens and also the money lens, and we look at how do the banks want to profit from Iran? What happened in Ukraine was fairly neutral, right? It was a buffer kind of territory, neutral, tried to maintain neutral. It wanted to borrow, I think it was $5 billion. And I'm talking about previous to 2014, to the Maidan, what happened with that. So the international financial institutions they went to from the Western banks, and they were going to make certain restrictions if they gave them a loan, certain conditions and so on. Of course, you got your high interest rates. So they checked out Russia. Hey, we need to borrow $5 billion. And Russia gave them a much better deal. So they were going to take that deal for the loan from Russia. That's when the red lights went on in the Western control power system, the banking system, and so on. We can't let Ukraine align in any way, shape, or form with our enemy, Russia, because that geopolitical picture was full spectrum dominance. It was about don't let any other place become anything that can compete to U.S. dominance. And I don't want to say to United States sometimes because it is the center of control, along with the Bank of England. The City of London banking system is a big power center. So we want to say the few who control, or the powers that should not be. But we also have to be careful not to just look at these figureheads, however powerful they may be, and think for a minute that executing or jailing a figurehead is going to solve our problem, because it didn't do that in France for the revolution. They guillotined their aristocracy. Thousands of people were killed, murdered. Russian Revolution. It was terrible, bloody, violent. And you know what? They didn't know really what to do after they murdered their aristocrats. And it got even bloodier and bloodier. And then Napoleon came along. And Napoleon's going to save us all. He's going to liberate all these other countries from their aristocracies. Oh, then he got the Watigo bug, and he declared himself emperor. So we're struggling with, we can't just get rid of the heads of state. You have to look at the soil, the structure, like in organic gardening. You're not going to grow healthy food in poisoned soil. So our basic rules of our economy, our basic structures of how we've established the money system and the land system are simply poisonous. They are toxic. We got to look at those. And if we get those set right, and we can start in small steps locally, while the old systems are falling apart, we can advocate and create the new that's going to be fair and just. We can do this alongside the falling apart, but we can't just say no. We got to have a vision of what to say yes to and start building that now. That also enlivens us psychologically and spiritually, because if we're constantly looking at the bad stuff, it brings us down. It's depletion. Young people are getting depressed. Young people are getting suicidal. It depletes the life energy. When we hold that vision, when the people, without vision, the people will perish. That has a lot of meaning. So the inspiration from our soul level, our higher consciousness, you love the arts, Regis. That's what I love about you. You're also sharing the beautiful arts in Crimea and Russia, the beautiful buildings, the beautiful dances, the beautiful artistic music expressions. Those are the higher consciousness, creative aspects of the human. That's why they're so important. So as we enliven ourselves with inspiring visions of a new and better life, and we put our energy there, and the wonderful thing happens. We start connecting with the people who share those aspirations, as I did very recently with the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. That's the oldest peace group on earth, it would seem. I think 1905 it was established. Yeah, 50 years ago, I was a young woman living in California and connected with the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and they asked me to become an economics advisor. Well, I didn't say yes. I didn't move along with that opportunity. A friend of mine mentioned Women's International League for Peace and Freedom a few days ago, and I said, oh, yeah. I looked up their website. I found out they're in 35 countries. I sent an email to them, and I said, 50 years ago, you asked me to be an economics advisor. I'm ready to do it now. So we had 50 women were on this fabulous conversation a few nights ago. And these are the heart-centered, peace-centered, high-vision people that I really want to keep connecting with. And we're going to use some of the videos, programs that you've been doing with Dateline on economics of war and peace as an educational foundation now for my economic advisorship for Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. So the connectivity, and as I speak, I feel happy, and you smile. It's the enlivening love of the connectivity of we are all human beings having this amazing experience on this amazing planet. We just want to create a world where our children can love and enjoy it.
Let me. That's a lot to unpack. I've been taking notes. Okay. Um, uh, this is where I want to start, and it's not where you started actually, but it was part of your little sermon.
Yeah.
You talked about consciousness, and my friend Eric Arnold talks about consciousness all the time. It's awareness, and it's like who we are, and there's a spiritual dimension to that, as you mentioned, and this is what I believe humanity has lost. The indigenous people have not lost it. Uh, you can't talk about Native American religions. It's not a religion. It's a consciousness, an awareness of who we are, and who we are in connection with everything on earth and in the sky, and that's spirituality. And so I wanted to underline that. It was a very important point that you talked about. I'm going to come to the vision in a minute, okay? Or we'll come to it before we end the show. You mentioned land, and we've been talking about land. And you said something that I think is very important. Full spectrum dominance. Now, I've been talking about full spectrum dominance for, I don't know, a very long time now. My friend Bruce Gagnon, who's the coordinator of the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space, he first put me onto this doctrine, and it's accepted doctrine of the United States of America, that we will control and dominate this full spectrum. What's the full spectrum? It's land, militarily, navies, economically, whatever. It's the air. We will have air superiority over everybody. It's the sea. And look at the United States. We've got the largest naval, whatever you want to call it, armada in the world. We're everywhere. And then there's space. And Donald Trump created his own space force, a new division of the military. Why? Number one, to deny access to any other country to that land. I mean, that when you think about space, you don't think about it as land. We think about that's the Earth. But look what we've done in space. We have satellites, tens of thousands of them. Some of them are falling out of the sky. We have sent satellites to faraway planets, and some of them are still going. And the second reason is, after denying other countries access to space, is that these same greedy, evil creatures see that they can mine all the resources of space that are on asteroids, that are on Mars, that are on Venus, that are, wherever they want to go, they see resources, they see money. So in terms of what's got to be part of the deconstruction is that concept, which is at the basis of all wars. Star Wars, we're already there. Russia, China, India, I don't know, a few other countries now have got satellites in space. They have intercontinental ballistic missiles that go up into part of low space and so there it is. It's anyway. I wanted to mention that full spectrum dominance, and the other thing that I wanted to mention, there's a different kind of war, and I think it's probably going to be more of the way wars are going to be fought in the future. They're not going to be like World War I, World War II. They're not going to be like what's going on in Ukraine right now. They're hybrid wars. And the CIA has perfected this concept of hybrid wars, and they've been using it for 80 years. And what's involved in hybrid wars? Economic sanctions. Look at what the United States is doing right now. They've been doing it forever, sanctioning countries that they didn't like. And the purpose of sanctions and their declarations of war, they're evil, they kill people, is to weaken the population of a country, to create regime change, to create the opportunity to go in and rape and steal the resources. The second part of this hybrid warfare involves targeted military strikes, targeted, not big invasions, but targeted. Did we see examples of this? Yes, we did. Israel has been targeting locations in Iran for several years. The United States last year, under the order of Donald Trump, bombed what he called their number one nuclear lab or research center, targeted strike. He just did it again in Venezuela. They didn't just go in and kidnap Maduro. They targeted parts of Caracas and other parts of the country with bombing. And so this is the second part of it. The third part of it that we saw just recently in Venezuela, and we're seeing it right now, we saw it just this last week in Iran, is creating unrest. And the CIA has been spending billions, maybe trillions of dollars over the years, infiltrating countries, paying, what do you want to call them? People who go in there and create violence, create unrest. And then they've created these learning opportunities where they indoctrinate people with these ideas about, oh, your government is terrible and this is what you should do. And we saw the riots in Venezuela, pro-Maduro, but in Iran, the same thing. The CIA in Venezuela and Iran created this unrest that then leads to a collapse of the regime. And finally, Alanna, we're seeing it today, not just to bring down a country, but it's called the information campaign, where the CIA in the United States, through Operation Mockingbird, has controlled all of our media for nearly 70 years when it was created. They own the media. And today it's gotten so bad. William Casey said, he was the CIA director under Reagan. He said, we'll know that our project, Operation Mockingbird, was successful when everything Americans believe is a lie. Isn't that where we're at today? Everything that Americans believe about Russia is a lie. Everything they believe about China is a lie. Everything they believe about anything is a lie. And when you put these four things together, hybrid war, you don't need bullets. You don't need tanks. You don't need missiles. You can just go in and you can win the war. And the war is for what? Land and resources and wealth. Now, I have one last thing, and then I'm going to throw it to you because this is something that's really missing today. And I mentioned this in the opening. You know, there's a lot of people that will argue about ideology and systems of capitalism or of economy. And there are a lot of ideas about, well, taking it down, we need to somehow crush the system. We need to punch the bad guy in the mouth, and we need to go get these evil creatures that basically own it all, and we need to hang them from a lamppost. Okay, so what are you going to do after that? What kind of system do you want to create? Do you have a vision? Alanna, you and I have been talking about that. It gets back to this connectedness, this consciousness, this spiritual awareness. And I don't even want to get into a discussion and an argument about is socialism or communism better? The indigenous people didn't have socialism and communism and capitalism. What did they have? They had this consciousness, this awareness of who they were in relationship to each other. You know, I was looking on your website, and I wasn't able to put it in here now, but it's I pledge allegiance to the earth and all the life which it supports, one planet, in our care, irreplaceable, with sustenance and respect for all. I had that poster on my wall in the United States. I don't know what's happened to it, but I have it as an electronic JPEG. And that doesn't that say it all?
That poster was created by Janina Lamb, and Janina writes on a Substack now. But it is truly the beautiful sentiment that we want to bring forward. So,
well, you know, I bet when people say, "Where are you from?" Well, it's depending on the context, of course. I say, I'm from planet Earth.
Yep.
You know, somebody drew these boundaries at one time or other. But when you look at that little blue marble ball out in space, there's no boundaries. There's no states. There's none of that. It's just the Earth. And so I've been guided by that poster. You could tell Janina Lamb, if you're in touch with her, that it has affected a lot of people. Several of my friends have the same poster in their homes. So let's now have you explore with the time we have left. So what do we do? It's about vision. And I know you have a couple of examples of very small steps that people are doing in different parts of the world. They actually have a different vision, and they're actually taking little steps to achieving that vision. Why don't you pick it up from there?
And I will. And if I may, just the main points that you just made. The full spectrum dominance. Most people in the United States have probably never heard that phrase. It's because people in the United States are never invited or encouraged to even consider foreign policy. I ran for Congress twice, and no one ever asked me a single question about U.S. foreign policy. None of our legislative representatives ever bring the people together and ask their views of foreign policy. So with enormous ignorance about what the U.S. is really doing out there, and this needs to be broken through, and people need to awaken to this dynamic. Now, the CIA, you mentioned, our last real, many of us feel, president was JFK, John F. Kennedy. And he had the intention, he stated, to break the CIA into thousands of pieces because he saw the game. He and his brother Bobby, who became his attorney general, they saw the game. They were almost the only ones there at the time against all their advisors and these crooked people who had the clear intention that the undermining of democracy, of the governance of the people, was due to this covert, secretive, powerful institution, this rogue institution, the CIA, or at least a big portion of the CIA. Some CIA people, they think they're in there doing some good things. Who knows? Maybe they are. But there is definitely a portion that is very much intent on power and control. In fact, right now, as I speak from my location, I am 50 miles from Bobby Kennedy Jr., the nephew of JFK, who, as many know, is now in charge of our major health and human services organization. And he's speaking in the Harrisburg State Capitol Rotunda right now. And he's speaking about how to make America healthy again, the MAHA movement. And he's been doing some good work facing the obstacles that he has about big pharma, which is another elite control mechanism. I talk about that in a video called The Corruption of Economics and Medicine. So he's speaking right now, 50 miles from where I stand. And if you're really going to make the people healthy again, you have to address the whole power dynamics, because we know that where countries have the grossest wealth inequality, no matter how much money we throw into the health system, people are not going to get and stay healthy. No matter how much we talk about organic agriculture, if you control most of the land and people can barely afford to buy land, to buy a little farm anymore, you are not going to have healthy food to create in sufficient amounts that people can afford in order to create the health that we need. So that's current reality. Now, you wanted to look at, and I completely forgot where you wanted me to go. Is it Venezuela? Where did you want to take this next? Oh, the other thing is before you, okay, how are we going to turn this around, you ask? Now, he or she who draws the map controls the territory. We know how important it was to be able to draw maps. You know, the old ships were guided by the stars, the North Star. And then the conquerors or the conquistadors, they mapped territory. In Ohio, the state just west from where I live in Pennsylvania, when the native people saw, interestingly enough, it was George Washington's, one of his first jobs as a young man. He led a team of surveyors to our frontier. When the native people saw these surveying teams come into their territory, they said, uh-oh, we're really in trouble. They're drawing maps of our territory. That means they're going to go and try to grab it from us. And they did. So the importance of mapping. We have a technology now, Regis, that is incredibly useful. The technology is called informational maps, data maps, GIS, Juno, other kinds of software to create land value maps. Excellent. This is answering the question of who owns what land where, how much is it worth, and how much does these landowners pay in commons rent into the public finance system as we shift taxes off the backs of labor, wages, and production. How much would come? And it looks like, by our calculations, GDP is a really rough estimate of wealth, but it's what we've got, that it looks like the commons rent is 1/3 of GDP, overall wealth. So the unearned income coming from simply owning a piece of paper that says you own it, land and resources, your profit from that ownership is actually generated by nature and society as a whole. It's a commons. So our land value maps, I'm going to give you a wonderful example. We have a team working in Baltimore, Maryland. That's about 70 miles north of Washington, D.C. And they're doing the tax shift work. They're called Baltimore Thrive. And what they have found out is not only is the land value unfairly assessed, where the wealthier areas' land value comes out as disproportionately more than the land value of the poor neighborhood. So right there, you see the poor neighborhoods are paying proportionally unfair, larger share of property tax for city government. So we've got to get the land assessments accurate, and we can do that through this marvelous information technology. So we've looked at a poor neighborhood. What did we find? They're about 2/3 renters. Their rents, their apartment and house rents, are being taken out of that community and into the wealthy areas. Now, if we tax the land value, which is what our work is about, those who simply own those sites in the poor area, they would then be paying into the common fund for the basic public needs that are necessary. So we can see through land value mapping who owns what land where, what is the amount that they're profiting. And in the prophet Ecclesiastes says the profit of the earth is for all. There's a lot of prophetic teachings around what I'm talking about that go back through history. It's like a thread of perennial wisdom teachings around the land problem and what to do about it. So we see in these land value maps, the land values owned by people who aren't even having buildings on their land. These are vacancies. just are boarded up buildings left to rot when we need affordable housing and we need housing for the homeless. We should never have homeless in this country. So we can see now very clearly in the land value maps who owns what land where, what is its value, and then how much they should be paying into the Commons Fund. I call it Commons Fund, but it is a practical, elegant, amazing, nonviolent way to restructure our local taxes, starting with the property tax, which is putting now too much on the house and the buildings and those labor-created values and necessities like housing. There's too much tax on the housing value and too little tax coming from the commons rent, the land value. All we're working for is a simple, basic, practical shift to shift that property tax so that the land value is the major tax, not the house and wage tax on property. So that's one thing that we can do now wherever we live. We have our Common Ground USA organization. We have chapters throughout the country. From there, I'm president of the Mid-Atlantic chapter. So our chapter members are working to create and build these practical projects for this tax reform. I worked in the 1990s when I moved back to Pennsylvania, the boroughs, the smaller towns in Pennsylvania, of which there are 1,000 boroughs with about 1 million people population. They did not have the enabling legislation to even let the boroughs make this choice. So it's a long story a bit. I'll talk about it in my book. Just briefly, we were able to educate the Pennsylvania legislature sufficiently, working with our Boroughs Association on how this works. The Boroughs Association lobbied with us, and we got a bill passed through Harrisburg unanimously, only one abstention. Can you imagine a tax reform bill that goes through your state legislature unanimously with only one abstention? That's what we succeeded in doing. And it simply enables now all these smaller towns to make the same choice for property tax reform. Now, we do have a number of cities and towns in Pennsylvania that have documented success with this approach. I can talk about them, but I won't take the time now. We have land lease cities in the world, like Singapore. I'd like to talk more about how in Singapore, that city-state owns the land, and then they charge sufficiently high lease fees to those who have the land use rights. I can talk about our Alaska Permanent Fund, how that was established to capture a significant amount of oil rent, the unearned profit from oil, to capture that for the people of the state of Alaska, for which they receive direct citizen dividends, cash checks every October. It's been up to a couple $1,000s per person. A family of 4, that's added income of $8,000 a year. That's a significant amount of added income. And the people are educated that this check is not some government benefit. This is theirs by right of ownership as a commons, equal ownership as a commons of the natural resources of the state of Alaska. It's a state, I think it's the only state that has this in their state constitution. They have rights to the commons of mineral resources in their state constitution. That's an earth rights democracy human right embedded in a constitution. That is the earth rights democracy. Now, they don't have the whole picture. They're not capturing the commons rent to the surface land, which is really important. Because when you increase any kind of income, whether it's a government check or your wages or a dividend check from your oil, it is ultimately going to increase your surface land value. Now, that surface land value has to be recaptured, recycled back into the Commons Fund. So what I'd like to present in future is a very holistic model of commons-based earth rights democracy based on the several resource rent domains of surface land, natural resources, geopolitical conflict areas. We see Greenland, we see the Arctic now, another hegemonic grab by our imperial president, attempted grab, and based on this Wetiko consciousness of full spectrum dominance, It's just once you see the land problem, Regis, you just see it everywhere. You see, well, this is got to really see it, and then we got to solve it, and then we say, voila, we have the tools, principles, right thought, policies, right action, to have the full capacity, we the people of the planet, to build a world that truly works for everyone, local, regional, minimum necessary global governance.
You know, you don't sound like a commie. You don't sound like a socialist.
What is
No,
she?
really. No, that's exactly the point. It gets back to a consciousness, an awareness, and a spiritual awareness. Now, as I'm listening to you talk about this, I'm going, you know what? When they find out about you, those evil possessors of wealth and land, they're going to come after you. This is a huge threat. If this could ever take off and really be ubiquitous, worldwide, you're going to make a lot of people very nervous, including a lot of folks who just own a bunch of land. And I'm thinking of one of them is one Bill Gates, who if there's a hell, he's going to have a prime spot down there together with a lot of other folks. Now, Alanna, I want to thank you for this conversation. I really had no idea really where it was going to go.
I didn't either.
But I'm really glad we covered the things that you did. And, if you can find a connection with people like me, and there's a lot of us out there who have been awake and aware and have been conscious and have a spiritual awareness, I'm happy to help do that. I'd like to connect with that group of women that you talked about.
Yeah, you're on. You're going to be there Monday.
Okay. Oh, okay. Now, before we conclude, we had between 7 and 9 viewers, and probably on YouTube or wherever they're viewing from. If you're seeing this live, and if you see it recorded, because it's being recorded on automatically on Facebook, YouTube, and X, please like it. Please subscribe to my YouTube, Substack, and BitChute and Rumble platforms. I'm asking you this because the things that I talk about on my shows are things that the algorithms, the people who control the information systems, don't like. And so, on the one hand, I've been permanently deleted from YouTube 3 or 4 years ago. I had this other account that would flash across the screen. Please like and subscribe, because shadow banning is incredibly powerful. It is so sophisticated that you don't have to write something. If you just say certain words or phrases, these algorithms, artificial intelligence, would automatically delete you, silence you, or not allow you to be seen by very many people. So if you appreciate the kind of shows that I do, which I think are very different than what most bloggers are doing, most influential people, please like and subscribe. Alanna, I can't thank you enough for tonight. We'll look forward to the next one.
You're welcome. But Regis, may I tell, please, in ending, a sweet little metaphor story that addresses your loving concern about any potential assassination on my life, okay? Because we know that truth speakers have been murdered many times throughout the ages, and certainly in our century. And we're just now out of Martin Luther King's birthday. And he also talked about these ideas. He talked about domestic colonialism to describe the structural problem of poverty in the United States as it related to our Vietnam Wars and so on. And this little story is from a book called Butterfly. And it's from my long-time dear friend, Nori Huddle, who is an expat living in Ecuador on the Garden of Paradise, is what she says, calls her place. So a butterfly, as we know, goes from this little tiny thing, grows into a caterpillar. It eats and eats a lot of leaves. And then at some point it creates a cocoon, forms a butterfly. Now, what's happening in the cocoon? It becomes mush. But the immune system of that caterpillar starts attacking these new kind of cells. And these are actually called imaginal, like imagination, imaginal cells, because the caterpillar's immune system sees these cells as a threat. And so they kill them. But the caterpillar creature inside the cocoon now, in its transformative, protecting its transformation stage in that cocoon, that safety little node of a cocoon, chrysalis, more and more imaginal cells are forming, and they overcome that attacking immune system of the caterpillar, and they form the butterfly. And the butterfly emerges and spreads its wings and fly. We are at a point where, true, there are so many of us who've been incubating in this little beautiful cocoon and growing our wings and now sprouting forth. It's not just one. It's not just one here and there, Martin Luther King, a JFK, a Jesus Christ, whoever, throughout the ages. It's the many. Now, this is the consciousness emerging now on the planet everywhere. Okay? Nothing to be afraid of. We're all in this together.
Yeah. I love the metaphor of the butterfly coming out of the cocoon from the caterpillar. I've used that, not the story from your friend, but I've used that metaphor before. And I do think, and I want to hope that that's where we are as humanity. We're seeing the end of an old world order that's crashing, that is really, it's just hanging on to finally breathe its last. And we're not quite sure yet what's going to emerge from the cocoon. And I think it's people like you and the people you're involved with that have that hope and have that belief that out of this transition period will come something really beautiful for everybody. Alanna, thank you. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.